Herzlich willkommen zu Women Hit Harder, the Female Power Podcast.
Hi, guys. Thanks for tuning into Women Hit Harder, the Female Power Podcast. I'm your host, Julia Dorny, and for episode 52, we have a very special guest with us today, Dean Thomas. Dean, happy to have you.
I'm happy to be here. This is amazing. Women Hit Harder podcast. I love the concept. I love the name, and I'm all for it. I'm all for it.
I'm so glad you found your time, always working and doing crazy things around this. But let me just give a brief overview, guys. So Dean is a UFC pioneer and ESPN analyst and a major influence in the world of mixed martial arts, both as a fighter and a media personality. Not only has he left his mark in the cage, but he's also found success as an actor and producer and continues to shape the sports narrative through his work with UFC and beyond. So, Dean, you have such a diverse career from being a UFC pioneer to being a media personality. What first drew you to MMA and what was your journey like leading up to your big break?
Well, I mean, it's so you got to understand that when I got started, it wasn't really a sport yet. It was back in the 90s. So we were all still trying to figure this whole fighting thing out. So at the time, really, I was a small teenager, very tiny. I weighed about 80 pounds and I didn't want to get beat up in the street. So I figured I'd learn how to do jiu-jitsu, learn how to fight. And one thing led to another. It more opportunities started presenting themselves in terms of sport, the sport aspect of it. Next thing I know, I'm fighting in the UFC. So I mean, but it really wasn't about the sport aspect of it as much as it was just being able to defend myself and the people around me when I'm in the streets.
Oh, I hear you. So you were just really looking for the self-defense aspect as more so than like just seeing it as a competitive sport, huh?
Yeah, I never really found it as a competition for me. And I think maybe that's why I didn't have the career that maybe I should have had because I never was really all that competitive in terms of, oh, I have to beat this guy. I have to beat that guy. I have to again, it was a different time where we wasn't making enough money. Like maybe if there was more money involved, I would have been more motivated by the money. But to me, it was just about defending myself. So I'd show up to fights and go, all right. I mean, there was a puzzle to solve in terms of beating him, but I was just like, as long as I don't get hurt, I'm good. You know what I'm saying? Like I'm gonna go out there and fight this other human being, and if he don't hurt me, I'm good. Like I won. He didn't hurt me. So maybe that was at the forefront of my mentality in terms of a fighter, which probably doesn't work as much today because there's a lot more entertainment involved. It's a major sport and it's different times, but being able to adapt with those times has kept me in the sport, which is why I'm still here today.
Well, obviously, but yeah, that's a good actually hook for me too, because I wanted to know you were obviously part of the early UFC days when there were like no rules almost. I know they changed it later. It's been around for over 30 years now. And but how have you personally seen evolve the sport over the years?
Just the whole sport aspect of it, and well, the whole sport slash entertainment aspect of it. So now we're getting better athletes and not just guys who want to fight for beer money. We're getting like legitimate athletes of people who get into the sport and go, all right, I'm going to be good at this. And plus, the fighters these days are starting so much younger that they're just naturally better. I mean, if you were to look at the athletes of today, even at the regional level and compare them with the fighters from my day at the highest level, it's a big drastic difference of skill level. They're just so much more skilled now.
Well, yeah,
From yeah, from grappling to striking. Like even the striking looks so much better. Everything looks so much cleaner. So that just evolved inherently. And then just the entertainment value of it too. I think the UFC has done a tremendous job of putting the putting MMA in front of people to where they respect it. Because in my day it was like, oh, this is barbaric. It's human cockfighting, and they were trying to ban it, and no one wanted to cover it. ESPN didn't want to cover it. So the fact that I work for ESPN now is like a dream come true. It really is. Because I remember thinking, we're a legit sport. MMA is a legit sport. Why can't we get on ESPN? And we weren't allowed. But now I work for ESPN, so it's a legit dream come true.
I was going to say what most people don't know about UFC is when you look back at their history. Um, well, from what my research showed me when I did my master thesis on it, it was they wanted to check out pretty much which was like the most eloquent and most successful sport. So, boxer versus sumo wrestler, judo versus karate, BJJ versus kickboxing, all that stuff. And then I remember those those times where there was this one guy with one glove against this sumo person, and he lost
Yeah,
a tooth,
Art
and I was
Jimerson.
like. Yeah, and you were like, "Oh my goodness, that's crazy!" And like from looking back at that, what it is now, well, what we speak about those well-rounded fighters, and everything has to be on top. You cannot miss one discipline these days because otherwise you just get, you know, eaten in that cage.
Well, I mean, not only just that, like that's back in the 90s where we saw it was so segregated in terms of skill set, but even in the mid 2000s where I had my strongest run, we considered ourselves well-rounded. The fighters, myself and BJ Penn and Kenny Florian and we considered ourselves well-rounded, but even if you take a sample of what we were doing back then compared to what they're doing today, it's still a drastic difference. It still looks so much cleaner and so much better today. And we trained everything back then. It's just so much better. There's so many shortcuts to how to get good today than it was back then because we were just making it up.
Well, I wouldn't say you would make this up, but I understand with the idea of a new sport and you're like part of, the entire evolution of something. It's something different when you build a sport from scratch.
Yeah, I mean, it does give me a lot of pride in that. And it also gives me a sense of authority to talk about it the way I do because I'm pretty bold when I talk about MMA. I really am. I'm very bold about it. I talk about it as if I know a lot about it because it might be the only thing on earth that I know a lot about. So
Oh, come
I'm
on, don't
very, yeah,
downsize
yeah,
yourself.
I'm very bold and I'm very assertive when I'm talking about MMA, and I'm kind of a snob to people about MMA. I'm an elitist. I'm like, huh, how dare you think you could talk about my sport? I go to the shows and there's celebrities there. I was just at UFC this past weekend. The celebrities are there, and I'm a snob about it. Like, huh, how dare you come and talk about my sport like this?
Thank you for this insight. That makes me laugh. That's good. That's interesting. Because I also experienced that, when I, obviously as a fighter and journalist, and you have to be objective, but then people, certain journalists when they get very subjective and emotional, especially over there in Europe when it wasn't as evolved as it is now in the States or whatever, people would be, oh my goodness, what you described to the cockfighting and modern gladiators and all that stuff. You're like, man, no, it's a sport like any other sport. And even actually, it's the queen of the sports because it combines everything. It's just such a big package.
Well, it's not only that, but it's also like it's this big package, but it's in its core and in its element, it's so elementary because it's fighting. And
Hmm.
that is, in a sense, the ultimate sport and the ultimate game of survival, fighting in itself. So while it's so complex in terms of like you got to learn all these different disciplines, but at its core, it's okay. It's you versus me. We got no weapons, and who's going to make the other person quit?
Right.
At the end of the day, it's so complex, but yet so simple, which is why yin and yang is really the key to life because everything is hot and cold at the same time, big and small at the same time, simple and complex all at the same time.
It's the same with cold, right? Where like cold is just the disappearance of the heat, of the warm. So in its physical definition.
I can tell you're from Germany. I spent a lot of time in Germany with some Germans, and you're very philosophical, and I love it. I always thought that European coaches are so much better than American coaches in terms of MMA. I really
Really?
do. I really do. I think that you guys have a better thought process towards the sport. Um, and I just don't know if you guys realized it yet in terms of
Well,
being European.
I don't know. I mean, honestly, when you look at the UFC, we had a couple of German fighters on there on those cards, but the Germans never really did too good, unfortunately,
No.
which I never really understood. But I think the American game or mindset or whatever you want to say is just a little different.
Well, that's exactly what it is. And so I spent some time in Frankfurt with some guys.
MMA spirit.
MMA Spirit, yeah. And
Yeah.
I talk to Niels Schlegel all the time about
Yeah.
and his guys all the time about imposter syndrome. And I think because you guys are so far away, like the European scene is so far away, and they don't get to experience it a lot. They don't know that they belong. And then when they get to the UFC, they don't realize that they belong, and they don't fight their best fight. And I
And you
think
know
Dustin
what?
Stoltzfus might be figuring this out.
Yeah, Dustin, but he's technically American. I mean, he's lived most of his life in Germany, but he's technically American too, you know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So yeah, he was also on my show a couple of months ago. No, a year ago. Oh my goodness, it's been forever. Yeah. So he's a good guy, great fighter, very analytical too, which I've always liked. Very down to earth. Not I just liked his style always. And we did some stuff together. We went to see the American ambassador in Berlin and all that stuff. So that was pretty cool.
Mm,
Um, I meant to ask you though, have you ever in your life needed to put your fighting skills on that street?
never. So, well,
Good.
well, well, kind of. I worked as a bouncer as I was coming up as a fighter. So every so often I have to carry people out, or I would take a couple punches in the back of the head. And when you train often, like that's nothing. It's like flies or mosquitoes, you know. So, but in terms of like a real street fight, I've been preparing my whole life for a good old street fight, and it's never happened.
People
So
probably just avoid you now with your body language and your posture, always chin down. They're like, well, don't mess with this guy. He knows his stuff.
I think so. I think that's really what it is. Like I'm on an airplane and nobody, like my chin is always down, my ears are mangled. I think people see that and go, all right, don't mess with this guy.
Yeah. Especially when you have a tough guy that knows his stuff and is wearing flip-flops, not backing off, chin down. You're like, oh, you better run.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like you can just tell the demeanor of somebody.
Yes.
But yeah, I never had to put it to use, but I still work out a little bit enough today just to where if it does happen, I'm going to be prepared. I'm going to be ready.
That's good. You better be ready. Don't mess with Din Thomas.
Yeah, yeah.
I also wanted to know, so obviously you are a pioneer of the UFC, and I just wanted to know what it means to you when people refer to you as a UFC legend or a pioneer of the sport.
Um, well, that's where I get a little conflicted in myself because, like I said, I feel as though MMA and MMA fighting in general, it's like the one thing that I know about, and one thing that I consider myself an authority, an expert, and I can talk to anybody on the planet about. It doesn't matter. But the idea of me being a legend, it still doesn't really sit well with me. I feel like in my head, I'm just like the same little kid that studies fights to figure out better ways to do it. And the idea of me being a legend, it still doesn't sit well with me. I never really consider myself that. I just still feel like I'm the same young little kid, 80 pounds, trying to figure this out so that I don't get beat up. That's all I am. At the end of
It
the day,
sounds like
that's
you,
all I am.
yeah, it sounds like you got a little lost in time there, huh?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm
I
almost
mean,
50.
it's just a number. But you know
Yeah.
what? It's funny that you say that because, well, I'm 34 now. I've been in my sport for 28 years, over 28 years. And I feel like sometimes I'm talking to people at the gym when I work out or whatever, and they're not even that old. Like
Yeah, right.
28 years
Yeah.
in one thing, and they're not even that old. And you're like, man, shit, oh my goodness. And obviously, as a female fighter, it's even different, I guess, for your like when is your active times, right? They obviously you can fight until you're like, let's say 40 or maybe a little over 40. But as a female, if you don't already have children, this is a big decision that you have to make. It's easier for
Yeah.
male fighters when they have a woman or wife outside of that sport who doesn't fight. It's, they still have the family, but as the female fighter, like I guess in no other sport you could still train, but fighting or competing, it's just so different.
Well, those are things that I never really consider. And I train a lot of women. And I those are things that are lost on me that are real things. That's a real thing. Like the idea of do I have a career or do I want to start a family? And that's a real thing. And that's something that men never have to deal with. Men never have to deal with that. So I feel for you. Trust me, I do.
Yeah, and then also it's obviously when you train a lot and you're on a diet, you lose a lot of weight, you might not be able to get, I know a lot of female
Mhm.
fighters that suffer from that. They don't even get their periods because the body's just so thin and in this like safety mode and yeah, saving energy mode, and they cannot even get pregnant. Maybe, that happens to some people, and I think that's crazy. But how also women are affected with the hormone levels and all that training, and obviously it's a tough sport and you have to be hard, and so it's really crazy. And I know as a couple of triathletes that go through the same thing, but especially with fighters, it's I guess it's tough. Like the body, it's like all your cups are empty when you're on a diet, and no fetus or no sperm is gonna ever survive in there because
Yeah,
just not
yeah,
enough
yeah.
energy.
Not a healthy environment for growth.
No,
I
no,
get that.
no.
Yeah,
And it's
for sure.
interesting how the body just says rejects it. Like, no, let's try it one more time when you're like eating healthy.
Yeah, wow. See, I don't even think about that. See, and that's why I try to stay open-minded because we all live different realities. And
Yeah.
my reality doesn't exist, but that's a reality for you and even many of the women that I train.
So yeah, I'm glad we got to talk about it, and I thank you really much, and I appreciate it even that you stay open about it, because yeah, it's all part of the game, right? And at the end of the day, it's you making the decision, or maybe even sometimes your body is making that decision for you. I'm just not just talking about the pregnancy and all that stuff. I'm talking also about that those injuries. You really want to
Hmm.
fight. Your mindset is right there. Your mind is there. You're putting everything into it, but one injury followed by another, followed by another. There's so many, I guess, how do you say, failed fighting careers for people who really wanted it. Then all the concussions, the white matter, brain stuff, joints, it's just discs, spine. It's just so sad.
Well, that's the thing about having a good MMA career and why you kind of have to have guidance, like proper
Mm.
guidance, because so many, like you said, so many careers are ended. Because in order to have, like anybody can really be a good fighter, but in order to have a real career, longevity in your career, a lot of things have to happen at the same time. And you have to get the right opportunities. You can't be injured when those opportunities come around. You have to win that fight, and then you have to try to get another. I mean, all these little things have to happen. And if it doesn't happen all at the same time, your career will just pass you by and you don't realize it, which is why like having good guidance at times can be like, all right, take this fight, don't take this fight, or don't do this training session. You're too hurt, like you're injured. You got to heal these injuries. Like having good guidance is important just for that reason. It's trying to align up all the positive things that you need in order to have a good MMA career.
Oh, I agree. And I honestly think it's not just in MMA, it's probably the toughest where you really see it, but also probably in a lot of other fields and in a lot of other sports. And then also this post-traumatic, let's say you had that dream, you got injured, you had a good guidance, but still, some people might fall into the depressions, drinking, alcohol abuse, drugs, whatever, because they're just so used that their names out there and they're called out and media pictures here, videos there, and out of a sudden, boom, they're out. And people might not even care about them no more because you know how the media works, and it's terrible,
Oh,
especially in the States. And
oh,
then they just
yeah.
fall off the wagon.
Oh yeah, for sure. Once you're out, it's a sad place to be. Like once you, and we see it a lot with, athletes even now, like certain athletes that were pretty popular for a certain time. And then next thing you know, they're forgotten about. Like no one cares about them. And I don't know how, I wouldn't know how to deal with it. Honestly, like I'm blessed to still be a part of the space. But for some fighters, I go, oh man, I don't know how you deal with life considering where you were to what you're doing now. Like it's really hard.
It is, and honestly, I could probably fill hours, even like nights, talking about this with you and other people. But I'm glad in this little time frame that we have here on this podcast, that we got to address it. And maybe hopefully when people listen to it, that they dig into it deeper, maybe reach out to us, or, leave some comments, or like we started an entire episode about topics like those. And that would really mean a lot to me. Um, I also wanted to know though, because now we got like in this little sad space, which I didn't want to be, but I
And
guess
that's a,
it's
hey,
good
that's
that
a
we have
real
to admit.
space though. It's real.
And but yeah, it's the reality, and that's I like when we not hold back things back, you know. I like when we actually face like truth and reality. So
Hmm.
yeah. But I wanted to know from you personally, looking back at your fight career, are there any specific moments or matches that stand out and they're definitely unforgettable for you or memorable for you?
I mean, for sure. And for all different reasons. I can think back to a lot of different fights, and they all helped with my growth, though. I mean, at the time, you don't realize how important they are, but looking back, I go, wow, that was a pretty pivotal fight for me. Like, I remember the first time fighting in Japan. It was in 1990, was it 98? 1998, fighting in Japan. And I went out there by myself, no corner. They gave me a corner when I was out there, and just those things kind of shaped me. And that one was really important for my growth as a human being and as a fighter to know that I can fight under circumstances that are less than ideal. Like you have to still show up. Like it doesn't matter what the circumstances are. If you sign on the dotted line, you still have to give them 15 minutes of your best work. So, and I didn't do that, right? So, and I could have made the excuse, well, a new country, no corner, but the reality is I didn't give them my best 15 minutes of work. So, um, that shaped me moving forward in my career and in my life in general. Is it when you commit to something, you give your best effort always. BJ Penn, my first fight in the UFC. I lost to BJ Penn. Again, it taught me to be a professional. Like you have to train and be a professional. So, these are like bad experiences that happen to me, but they shape me even more because, you can learn from good experiences. And I always try to tell people when something good happens, let's find the lesson in that and learn from that because when you get a bad lesson, that's the wake up call. Like, I don't want to learn from more bad lessons. I've done enough bad to learn from those lessons, but I try to learn from the good ones, but the bad ones will smack you in the face. So, y-
Literally.
yeah, yeah, they'll smack. You'll get a knee in the face, and I took that from BJ Penn back in June of 2001, and that was a lesson that I learned that I could do more. Like I can do more in training. I can do more. So, in terms of memorable fights, I think those two stand out the most for me. The two losses.
Okay, interesting. So yeah, and here we are again at the mindset, which is also so important. You're not just a training world champion when it comes to those stressful situations where you put yourself out there. You just have to be on autopilot. You just have to be able to not see anything else but yourself going in there, forget about everything, and just tell yourself to have fun. And I think the mindset really is so important. And I also sometimes have to say it's a pity that so many fighters, which are so unique and so great or whatever, they just defined by fight records. Like it's all about the fight record, at least I guess here in the States. It's just fight record, and that's all that matters.
Yeah, I hate that.
Yeah.
I hate it. I think it's a disservice to the sport. I hate people focusing on fight records. I hate people when they focus on trying to get the perfect matchup. I think that if you're a good fighter,
Yeah.
any fight is the perfect matchup. And if you don't think fights are a good matchup for you, maybe you're not as good as you think you are, and you have to come to terms with that. And it's okay to not be as good as you are ever going to be. It's okay to say, "Hey, I'm not as good as I want to be." But it's not okay to think you're the best in the world and go, "Oh, this is not a good matchup for me." That's not okay. Like either you are what you say you are and you can fight whoever and not be concerned and put yourself on the line, or you can come to terms and say, "Hey, I'm not there yet. I'm not as good as I want to be, so I'm going to take my time."
That's interesting that you say that because that's always been my credo. Credo. I mean, I fought in judo. Oh my goodness, probably over 800 matches. I fought all my life in different occasions, different sports, always different. But what I learned is never ever underestimate your opponent, and especially don't underestimate yourself. I mean, I'm not
Hmm.
saying you have to always show off, but just imagine once when you probably have a weak day or something, do you want to be in front of yourself getting hit or kicked by your own legs or whatever?
Right,
And I'm
right.
like, no, I don't. Oh my goodness, no. So, and then, don't forget this. Just don't
Yeah.
forget it. And this is sometimes, I guess, people focus so much on the opponent or the fight camp and what is the other person doing that they kind of almost forget about themselves.
Yeah, that's an important reality as well, is to take everything with a realistic approach.
Yeah.
You can't forget how good you are if you're that good. And fighters will do that. That's one of my biggest pet peeves in fights too. Like when I'm working with a fighter is when they beat themselves, when they don't perform to their ability because they, in an attempt to not underestimate their opponent, they overestimated their opponent and underestimated themselves. And that's a pet peeve. Like you can't listen, it's a skill to be able to actualize what it really is, and you have to do that, but don't underestimate yourself. Like if you're that much better, go out there and do it, show it.
Right. No, that's good. With that being said, I would like to go to your transition to the media and your analyst role. So, when did you realize that media and commentary would be your next career?
It never really was a thing. No, I was coaching fighters, and as a coach, I was always making videos. Like when I study fighters, I don't just study it and take a couple notes. I would do highlight videos. I still have them. I have highlight videos of when Amanda Nunes fought Ronda Rousey and Misha Tate. Like I did all her videos for her. And and that really shaped the way I looked at fights and now as I'm doing analyst work, it just really makes it all easier for me because I was doing it anyway. But I got the gig doing analyst work because I was working on Dana White looking for a fight, and I was riding bikes with, we were in Abu Dhabi, and I was riding bikes with the vice president of production. I didn't know who he was, but he was my bike riding partner while we were in Abu Dhabi during COVID. And he was like, hey, and we would just talk about fights every day. And then one day he said, hey, you ever thought about working on the desk? And I was like, man, that's not really my thing. He was like, I think you'd be really good at it. Because we just talked about fights. He said, I think you'd be really good at it. I'm gonna give you a shot. And then they called me and gave me a shot. Next thing I know, it's my thing. It's what I do. I'm just literally doing what I would normally do in terms of studying fights, but now I'm sharing it
Y-
with the world.
And you're getting paid for it.
And I'm getting paid. Yes, and I'm getting paid for it. It's weird because like it is like now it's my main source of income, and I look back and go, what the hell would I be doing if I didn't have this? I don't know what I'd be doing if I didn't have this.
Man, I just like so much that that you're so real about it and so honest. It's nice, yeah. So it's funny because I did it the other way around. I mean, I had my great journalism career over there, and I could have probably done anything, but I said, you know what? At this point, when I was like 32 when I moved here, I'm like, let me try just being the athlete without working my ass off as a journalist and train at the same time, because I just really wanted to focus on one thing for once. But sometimes it's not easy, especially when you get injured and you cannot fight, or you don't get a fight, or you scheduled a fight and your opponent drops out, or oh my God, whatever the reason may be, or your opponent suddenly gets pregnant, or I had it all. So you're just like, okay, well, what am I gonna do right now? So that's it's always good to have a second leg that you could stand on. I could always go back in my journalism work, which obviously I want to after I'm done with my fighting career. And it's just so good to have that education with me too, plus the being an athlete and being a coach too.
Yeah, well, I think you're in a good spot then because you have a very mature approach about this.
Oh yeah, I mean,
You know
I
what
was
you're
really
up for.
young when I learned this stuff, and I always thought, well, it's really hard to be. I was like coaching, studying, working, training, like there was like zero private life, but I felt like because I really wanted it so much, it didn't really feel like work. Obviously, it was exhausting, but I was like, this is my life. And looking back at it even now, I'm like, you know what? I don't miss anything. I mean, I've always been an athlete and I wanted to be an athlete. I never missed on partying or whatever. I always like to educate myself, even if it's on the mat or off the mat. It's just always been my thing. So I think this is, but you've met those fighters or athletes that just, yeah, I'm gonna be a fighter. I don't know what's coming after, but I'll do my thing. And then eventually some end up on social media doing OnlyFans.
Well, that's a dangerous place to be, not having, and I don't call it a backup plan, but I call it more of a what you're going to do when it's over. Like it's not necessarily a backup plan. It's just like eventually it ends, right? Eventually, like it doesn't last forever. So what are you going to do when it's not lasting no more? And like that's where a lot of fighters they can't see past their next fight, and that's a major problem. That's a major disservice to their lives if you can't see past your next fight.
Was gonna say they might just see the short-term picture, or money, fame, okay, whatever, but they don't see in the long run if they ever have a family, if they ever want to follow a legit career. And once it's in the web, it's in the web. It's out there. You can never forget it. It's always gonna be there. So how can you like explain this to your, let's say, TV broadcast boss when you want to be the news person that
Yeah.
your stuff is out there? It's just think a little bit ahead, like be a little smart.
Well, and that's why I have a lot of respect for fighters that have that foresight to know to make investments while they're still competing. Like Aljamain Sterling, he doesn't have to fight. Like he's got his own successful uh, rum company, and he's got properties that he rents and flips houses, and he does a lot of different things. And financially, he doesn't have to fight. Like he's set, and that takes a lot of pressure off of him when he's training. Like because he realizes that if I win, it's fine. If I lose, that's also fine. I'm going to be okay regardless. So it's a good place to be when you can set yourself up to have financial freedom after you fight.
Yeah, can I say amen? It's really, I like what you say. But I honestly, we only have 6 minutes left at this point, and I unfortunately have to come to an end here with you. As I said, it's probably could talk nights and days about all that stuff. This is our
For sure.
legacy. But MMA continues to grow, especially with younger fighters, obviously. How do you see the future of the sport?
I see it to continue to grow and for fighters to become household names even more so than it is. Like I never expected it to be where it is today. And every year it gets bigger and bigger. Records get broken and more opportunities. And the way we consume fights is getting easier and easier. I mean, it's going to be more platforms. Like the UFC is getting a new deal, probably a couple new deals with more platforms. So I just think that it's going to be a lot more opportunities for fighters, and I just hope the fighters are ready for it. I just hope that we get some good fighters that are ready to step up and be a star because the opportunities are going to be there. We just need some people to fulfill the need for that potential.
I was gonna say UFC, please open up the 145 division again.
I wouldn't be surprised. I think that there is a place for it. I would not
I
be
was gonna say there's
surprised.
a lot of tall, strong women out there. I'm 5'10" myself. Like, please, how am I gonna be able to go down to 135? I'm already,
Look at
pretty.
that. Look like you make me just want to ball up. Look at that. And when I saw when I saw you at the pillow fighting thing, I was like, oh my God, what is like I'm looking up at you like, oh my God, what is this? Holy, I was nervous. Yeah,
The German tank, the German
very
tank is here.
intimidating.
Come on. Thank you. I appreciate the nice words. But yeah, UFC 145 or yeah, maybe even 155. I wasn't a big fan of the 55, but 45, come on, there's so many tall women out there. Come on, give us a spot.
Yeah, I would not be surprised to see that come back.
Um, One last question, and then I'm almost letting you go. I just
Whatever you
wanted to
need.
know which advice you would give young fighters that are starting in terms of MMA training and having one background sport, or just start with MMA, do it all. What would you suggest a young fighter that's starting?
That's such a loaded question, but I think that to put it bluntly, the biggest thing in terms of training is making sure that you're having fun because you can't have a career in this if it's not fun to you at some level. It can't just be a job. You have to enjoy what you're doing. So much of your career it's automatically people are going to, you know, interfere with that joy. So you have to find the joy in yourself and your job. So showing up to train every day is going to be necessary. It might as well be fun. So make it fun. And when it gets serious, it still has to be fun. So I think that for all young fighters out there, allow joy and fun to come first. And that should really kind of guide your career along the way.
I mean, obviously, everything that you're doing on a professional level or that you earn your money with at one point is going to stress you out, right? But never forget the big picture that you initially started it because you loved it, and you should not forget this. So if you don't enjoy it no more, give it a little chance, maybe step to the side a little bit. And if you still don't enjoy it or miss it, then you're probably in the right spot. If it was just your body needed a break or your mind needed to tell you something, it's also fine, but you just have to learn to listen to that inner voice.
Yeah, well, that too. Like if it's fun for you, but you're getting hurt all the time, then that's
Oh, that's
trust.
a
Yeah,
whole big
trust.
other picture, yeah.
Yeah, trust your body too. Trust your body. Your body will tell you if you're getting hurt all the time. Probably not for you.
Well, with that being said, Dean, I thank you so much for your time sharing all your, well, you live in legacy status with us and all your insights, and it was really nice. I liked the conversation, and I would like to give you the last word if you had any key learnings or some advice or anything that you would like to share with the community, with the fans.
Well, no, I really appreciate you for having me on the show, and I learned as much from you as maybe I was able to share with your audience, right? Like the information that you told me about yourself and women fighting, I learned so much from that. So I appreciate you for having this platform and sharing your insight with everybody. So really, you're the star of the show.
Oh my goodness, Dean Thomas, thank you so much. I'm looking forward to seeing you hopefully soon at one event or the other. And I hope you have a blessed day. Thank you so much.
All right, you
Os.
too.
Os.
So, ihr Lieben, das war's für heute. Falls ihr Fragen oder Ideen habt, Anregungen, dann sendet mir doch gerne eine E-Mail an info@womenhitharder.com. Ansonsten bis in 2 Wochen zur nächsten Folge von Women Hit Harder. Bis dahin, bleibt gesund. Eure Julia.